Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Peter Winnick. I'm the founder and CEO at Thought Leadership Leverage, and you're joining us on our podcast, which is Leveraging Thought Leadership. Today, my guest is Meredith Bell. I'm excited to talk to Meredith today. She's an author, she's a speaker, and she produces a lot of assessment tools. She's the co-founder and the president of Grow Strong Leaders. She's the author of 2 books, Connect with Your Team and Peer Coaching Made Simple. She's been a speaker forever, and she does a lot in the assessment tool space, which is where we're going to spend some time talking today. So without further ado, welcome, Meredith. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's great to be here with you, Peter. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
So I want to talk a little bit about assessment tools because I am an assessment tool fan, nerd, geek, whatever. And the reason is, well, it's a couple of reasons. One is it's an asset you get to build once and use over and over and over and over again. And people love to see either at the individual level, the team level, the org level, some measurement of something to ground a conversation in an objective manner. So tell me about that.
Well, this adventure into assessment started back in the early 90s when my business partner and I were doing consulting work, and we wanted to use a 360 feedback tool. And back then there weren't very many choices, and they were all very expensive. And we had clients with all different economic means. And so we were frustrated that we couldn't customize it too. So we decided to create our own. And we did that, tested it with our clients and said, this is something a lot of organizations are looking for. So we made a pivot from being a consulting firm to a software company in 1994 and have never looked back. Our original product, 2020 Insight, is still going strong. And one of the things that people love about it is its customization capability consistently over the years. That's what they talk about because all organizations are really different. And what makes ours unique in a way is you can reassess at a period of time in the future and be able to compare scores. So as you were just mentioning, this idea of being able to tell, am I making any changes? Because we were frustrated too often, and I'm sure you've seen this too, where an organization will use an assessment tool. The person gets the information and then just sets it aside, puts it on their desk or throws it away. And nothing.
Well, they don't really know what it means or what to do with it. So unpack for us a little bit, because we do a lot of this on our end, helping our clients understand. But people often think like, oh, I've read strength finders and took that. I can create something like that. It'll take me a half a day. I can write up 12 questions and all that sort of stuff. So I always joke with clients like, listen, there's the Cosmo quiz or the makeup counter at Bloomingdale's, you're a summer, spring, which has no basis in science or truth or whatever. The true test ultimately of an assessment tool is, think about a ruler. It's 12 inches, period, end of conversation. It will always measure 12 inches. So, sort of at a high level, unpack for us what's involved to really develop a true assessment tool that is valid and respected by experts.
Yes. That's such an interesting question, Peter, because there's a couple of different layers to it. And one is related to, are you asking indirectly about certain behaviors or elements that lead to a factor? For example, extroversion on something like the Myers-Briggs. None of the questions come out and say, are you extroverted?
Right.
They're giving sentences, right, that have to be proven to relate to the factor that it says it's measuring. So that is a different kind of assessment tool. What we found with ours, because we were simply assessing behavior. In other words, you've observed me in a listening mode. Am I listening or not? There's no other factor that has to connect to. It's a direct observation.
So it's an isolated piece based on a behavior. Yeah.
Yes. And so the idea of validation, when you're looking at, is this valid for an organization related to an assessment like 360 feedback, the question is this behavior important for our organization? And so is it really a valid question to ask? Because if it's irrelevant and nobody's doing that, whatever it is, there's no need to ask it. Whereas another, like a personality or a style assessment, those need to be really carefully researched, tested. You've got to make sure that you've got that high correlation between the question you're asking and the factor you're attempting to measure.
And not to get too far down sort of the wonkiness of this, because I happen to enjoy this stuff, you also have to be clear around what you're claiming folks could use it for. So when you get into selection, meaning,
yes,
I'm thinking of hiring Meredith. This is an assessment I'm going to put her through, and it is going to be a criteria that influences my selecting her. That comes with liability, right?
That's right.
That's like sort of the highest standard. Now, it doesn't mean that people don't use it in that way. I could buy a hammer at Home Depot and use it to attempt to screw in a screwdriver. It's not smart, but it's not the intended use. And they wouldn't, the hammer company wouldn't have a liability if that's what I was trying to do. So I think you also have to be clear about what it's used for. So, you've been at the assessment side of this for a long time. Connect the dots for me, if you would, on writing, speaking, all of the elements of your thought leadership, because the assessment is just one place that it lives. But give me sort of the holistic view and how they all connect.
The whole reason for us being really as a company and what I'm passionate about is helping people realize their full potential and change habits that are getting in the way of them being effective. And in particular, the big theme across everything we do is around communication skills. How effective are you at communicating with another person? Because that's the core of everything. And getting things done at work and having a happy home life is how well am I able to connect with this other person, to express what I need, to listen to them and have them do the same. And tied in with that is, what does it take to change behavior? Because too often people are sent to a training class or they're given an assessment, and then the assumption is made they're going to automatically do something different. And that's not how the brain works. Yeah. And so we understand the practice, the reinforcement, the follow-up, the support, the coaching that's required to go with that. So that's part of what I
so really stay with that journey for a minute, because what I find often is folks take an assessment and then it gives you some insight at the individual level, or even an affirmation or confirmation of, oh yeah, that's me. I'm extrovert. That's me. But what it fails to do, if you just sort of read it and file it away, is say, okay, well, what about that is a strength, and what about that might I need to work on, and how, and for how long, and what do I actually do? Because if you're just looking for confirmation of, oh yeah, I'm a this, and I've got these fancy words to validate that in a little piece of paper or report, it doesn't really help in terms of behavior change. So how do you best, because you've got a sort of this full ecosystem here. The assessment, I would assume, is done sort of early in the journey to bring awareness and insight.
Yes. A lot of companies or consultants use it as part of an overall leadership development program as the front end piece.
Sure. Yep.
So what is it the person needs to really focus on, or at the front end of a coaching engagement?
Yep.
And so looking at that very thing that you just mentioned, to me, the value of a 360 is we all have blind spots. And so if we can look at this information as, oh, I didn't realize that. And that could relate to something that's a strength that people appreciate, as well as an area that's causing problems for them that they would like you to do something about. So,
and the same thing could be both, depending on the context, right?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Right.
So the key is to recognize what that is, and then look at and recognize the fact that I'm not going to change this overnight. I'm not trying to change my personality per se.
Right.
What I'm looking at doing is rewiring my brain. And that's why it takes time. Your brain has come up with this pattern of doing things. Think of it like a superhighway. It takes you no time to do the things you've done repeatedly over time. But if you decide, I'm going to be a better listener, I'm going to quit interrupting people, or I'm going to make sure that I involve everybody in the discussion when we have a meeting. Whatever new behavior you're looking at doing, recognize up front, it is not going to happen quickly. You're going to need some reminders. You're going to need practice, because what you've got, Peter, is like a gravel road or a dirt road that's under construction before you can make that new pathway in the brain a superhighway too.
Well, and sometimes what I have found, at least me, just speaking for me, is when you look at some of these assessments, there's some insight into your own stuff, which is really valuable. But then you also get insight into, oh, wait, there's other people and they are like this. So I might be like, if you look at like social styles, shockingly, I'm expressive. Guess what? There's a whole bunch of people that are analytic That's not my default. So now, I mean, and that's a fairly old assessment. So once, when I took social styles, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Here's the problem. And I sort of contextualize it. When I'm dealing with someone that's a little bit more scientific based or fact based or analytical, I need to change the way I communicate with them, or they're going to receive it in a way that's annoying to them or less effective or whatever. Mm-hmm. So I think it's that awareness of an other and saying, will I ever evolve from expressive to analytic? Probably not. But I have some wiggle room to say, okay.
Yeah.
Tweak the dial a little bit.
I've got a great question for people to think about. And that's simply to be, who do I need to be in this moment? Because we can realize we've got this flexibility. Just because we take an assessment and it says we're like this, it's dangerous to put a label on yourself, because then you're putting yourself in a box. Whereas the truth is we can be anyway in a given moment, in a given situation. What's the outcome I want here with this person? And so how do I need to show up in order to connect with them in the most effective, efficient way?
Got it. Cool. If you're enjoying this episode of Leveraging Thought Leadership, please make sure to subscribe. If you'd like to help spread the word about our podcast, please leave us a review and share it with your friends. We're available on Apple Podcast and on all major listening apps, as well as at thoughtleadershipleverage.com/podcasts. So let's sort of touch on the whole ecosystem. So you've got the speaking, you've got the books, you've got the consulting, you've got the assessment tools. From a business perspective, how are each of those potentially, let's call it a front door for a client to sort of come into your world, right? I would imagine there's a path that you want to take them, but a first touch point or first exposure to sort of Meredith world could be, I read your book, I took your assessment. I sort of give me how many front doors there are.
We have a lot of doors. Because some people really are looking for, let's say, a 360 tool, or looking for an online development system. And we have that too. A great place with our books, though, the Connect with Your Team is all about the top communication skills, and Peer Coaching Made Simple is all about how do you work with a partner to support each other and hold each other accountable as you're working to make whatever changes you're trying to make. So that's a specific
use case. So, peer-to-peer coaching is not only the most effective, but the most popular, for lack of a better term, a form of coaching where we are peers. So there's not this, I'm the expert and you're the student, so there's not this, we're peers, right? And we're in this journey together. There's some commitments we're going to make around confidentiality, et cetera. And it's easier for me if we work together to point out as close to as real time as possible. Hey, Meredith, you said you were going to be, less confrontational, but I noticed in the meeting that ... And so, geez, thanks for pointing that out. So the power of peer-to-peer is it's incredibly cost effective.
Exactly.
But it's this real-time feedback. It's like having, the equivalent of carbon monoxide detectors all over going with you, going, warning, warning, warning. So,
So you just nailed it, Peter, because it's so cost effective. We recognized that there are, fabulous executive coaches. That's not what we do, but there are lots of them. But a company or any organization can't bring an executive coach for everyone. So how do you provide the coaching? Because everyone needs it. How do you do that in an economical way? So we've created those two books with a facilitator guide to help an internal or an external person. So they can get started with that. If they've never used 360 before, this can be like laying the groundwork for getting that kind of feedback as a natural next step.
It's kind of a self-service DIY, low cost. Because even if you could afford the executive coach, which only a very small percentage can, they're only with you, whatever it is, an hour a week, an hour every other week. And they don't see you out in the wild, roaming the habitats.
Well, that's exactly right. And I think a key thing, Peter, just thinking about, this whole thing of thought leadership, to me, an internal executive who is a thought leader around being the best they can be and really, helping to develop their people so they create a workplace where people thrive, being able to bring in tools that are economical for everyone to be able to use. And I'm not a fan of just handing people books because that doesn't
because they don't read
change anything. It's having, and that's why we created this facilitator guide to help provide a structure to really make a difference, because that's what we're really all about. How do we make a difference so that people live more happy, satisfying lives at work and at home because of the way they connect with other people?
Got it. So I love that. So you've got several doors, then it's sort of egalitarian or the democratization of the content inside of the organization, which is also cost effective. What are the types of companies or organizations that are best fit for the work that you do?
Well, this will come as no surprise to you. The kind that would be voted or could be voted best places to work.
Right.
Because
so there's a self-selection piece,
the executive team already believes in the importance of creating a positive work environment. And typically those kinds of votes come when an organization places importance on people. And we have just found it's an uphill battle to try to convince someone of the value of this if they don't already believe that the people are important.
I think that's a critical point. I want to stay there for a moment or two.
Sure.
So in my work with a lot of clients, we're always trying to help them let's figure out how to help those that self-select find you easier and better. And oftentimes clients think, oh, but I could take the poor performers and make them better. And that may be so, but we're not in the conversion business. It's really expensive. It's really frustrating. If someone thinks that, they have this horrible toxic culture and you want to talk to them about it and they're like, we don't care about our culture here. We care about results. And you're in the culture change business, it's probably going to be a short meeting. Because even if wonder of wonder, you got that client, it's probably going to be a disaster. It's probably not going to be a good outcome. So I love the idea of taking sort of evolved folks, self-aware organizations, et cetera, and taking them from where they are, which is already at par or better, to best, versus taking folks that, if somebody doesn't believe in emotional intelligence or listening skills, great. There's so many other folks out there that can use your services.
Exactly. Right? That's such an important point, because we often think, who could I help the most? And yet it's a lot easier and more satisfying work when you take someone who's at a certain level and help them up level, to the next stage of either self-awareness or awareness of what they could do to build an even better culture. I'm glad you made that point.
Right. Sometimes what you might need to do on the front end is do some consulting work on the front end, similar to an assessment. I look at an assessment as an individual tool, right? But there are the equivalent of consulting tools that are ultimately an organizational assessment that say, hey, let's have an objective conversation. Because when I take an assessment, you give me a validated tool, it's no longer your opinion. You say, listen, Peter, here's how the test came out. You got on the scale. That's the number. It is what it is. Now let's have a conversation. Are you happy with that number? Do you want to change the number? Do you want to move the number? What does it do, et cetera? And I think if you can be objective, because telling someone your culture is toxic, or you're a horrible listener, or, the culture here is so ultra competitive and cutthroat that, it tissue rejects people that are more collaborative or emotionally intelligent, they're not going to change their minds, right? So you have to have some sort of a tool or an instrument to hold up to them.
And I'll give you a quick example, because our tool is so flexible, you can use it to assess anything too, not just a person.
Sure.
So the hotel manager was noticing he had a lot of absenteeism. There just seemed to be low morale. And so he brought in this consultant that was using our tool to do a survey about the whole organization. And he discovered he was the core problem.
Oops.
And so here was someone who had created kind of a, micromanagement, oppressive culture without realizing it. And so I think that's a key point. He reached out and looked for why. What's the reason why? And so the person who's an ideal client for us, let's say, wouldn't necessarily be at that high level of performance, but they're open. And so that was what he was. He was open. And once he realized that he was the key problem, he set to work on himself and had this person coaching him for extended months. When she came in, this consultant came in several months later, people just told her, this place is like dramatically different, because he made the decision.
All those other data points changed, right? People calling sick and all that other stuff. And the root cause was that this person was committed to making a change. I love that they were not self-aware and then became self-aware
Yes.
and changed. Because usually the story is for folks like that. Oh, they're, if they're the problem, let's blame the tool, right? Which speaks volumes in and of itself.
To his credit, he really wanted to see
right. I love that.
improvements. He didn't like that. And what was, of course, dramatically impactful too is his whole family life changed because of the changes he was making. It impacted his relationship with his wife, his kids.
Sure.
So this kind of thing to me is just so very exciting because we're not looking at compartmentalizing. When a person raises their awareness and changes, it has a ripple effect everywhere.
Well, and if someone's got a deficiency or someone's a jerk at work, they're probably a similar behavior at home or in other personal situations, unless they're, whatever, able to really pivot that. So this has been phenomenal. I appreciate your time and sharing your stories with us and the journey and your insights. This has been fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Peter.
To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.